Hi, everyone. I'm Louisiana Lightsey. I'm a PhD candidate in environmental anthropology at the University of Georgia, and I'm working on a paper that's called Worlding the Living Forest, Interculturality as Indigenous Praxis for Ecological Futurity. On September 16th, 2024, a group of 45 scientists and academics from around the world arrived in the Ecuadorian Amazon for a 2-week knowledge exchange meeting hosted by the indigenous community of Sariaku. Among the visitors were members of the More Than Human Life, or MOTH, project of New York University, the Fungi Foundation, and the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks, or SPUN. They had come with two central objectives: to collect mycological samples from the forest floor and subsoils of Sariaku's vast territory, and to deepen their understanding of Kausaksacha, a Quechua term for living forest that Sariaku has been promoting as a universal philosophy for socio-ecological well-being based on ancestral knowledge of the forest as an interdependent web of agential and spiritual beings. These two objectives, conducting rigorous scientific research and learning about indigenous rainforest cosmology, were not unrelated or at odds with each other. Sariaku leaders were certain that Western science was capable of demonstrating the validity of their worldview, especially when it came to underground fungal networks where interspecies interconnection is readily documented. While Sariaku had been promoting the Kausaksacha initiative for years, traveling the world over to spread the message that nature is alive and peopled with more than human beings who maintain its equilibrium, their most powerful audiences would not or could not understand. As Kausaksacha continued to be brushed off as too romantic, too primitive, too radical, or just plain backwards, the governing council of Sariaku decided they must try to validate their animistic ontology by interpreting its tenets through the lens of mainstream science. Sariaku's primary goal was not to ensure their rights were respected or identity recognized, but rather to transform the consciousness of those responsible for environmental destruction and climate change in order to avert global catastrophe and build healthy ecological futures for all humanity. Such a lofty mission would no longer be served by attempting to explain an ontology shrouded in radical alterity. The philosophy of Kausaksacha would need to be accessible, legitimized, and universal. In other words, it had to be constructed and communicated interculturally. When the scientists arrived this past September, Sariaku was ready to show and tell them everything they knew about the invisible life of the forest. Not to inspire or enlighten the group of open-minded Westerners, but rather to eke out every inch of possible common ground, to find some corner of commensurability between indigenous and scientific knowledge. Analyzing recent events, in this paper, I will argue that intercultural collaborations which integrate indigenous and Western ontologies in order to galvanize an agential and holistic view of nature is a new form of praxis which contributes to worlding a multitude of livable ecological futures. Throughout my analysis and discussion, I draw on ethnographic data that I collected during 17 months of anthropological fieldwork in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Interviews, participant observation, and social media analysis took place intermittently from the years 2018 to 2024 in the community of Sariaku, in their organizational office in the provincial capital of Puyo, and in New York City during the 2024 United Nations Climate Week. I will begin by providing some background on Sariaku and the Kausaksacha initiative before turning to an analysis of recent events from the past year. Comprised of 1,500 members, Sariaku is a pueblo, or association of 7 communities, located on the banks of the Bobonatsa River in Pastaza Province, Ecuador. Sariaku owns communal land title to a territory of 135,000 hectares of primary rainforest and has been a hub of anti-extractivist activism, political organization, and indigenous intellectual activity since the 1980s. In 2012, Sarayaku declared their collective ancestral territory as Kausaksacha, or the living forest in English, a living conscious being and subject of rights. In its preamble, the Living Forest Declaration declares that animals, plants, and landscape features are living selves and not natural resources. Spirit beings are the intrinsic protectors of healthy forests. The forest itself is a conscious living being and subject of rights, and knowledge is transmitted from all these beings to shamans who interact with them in order to maintain the equilibrium of the forest. Since 2012, the Kausaksacha Declaration has been scaled up into a proposal to conserve biodiversity and mitigate climate change at a global level by de-universalizing Western models of ecology. Interestingly, the proposal positions itself as a universal solution for climate change and for sustainable living, and it makes the claim that all humans are meant to be in relation with the beings of their ecosystem, and that the non-human beings of every ecosystem are also in relation with each other. Moreover, environmental destruction and climate change threaten the existence of the protector spirits themselves, which has grave consequences for the rainforest. Sarayaku leaders and activists have been deeply engaged in spreading this message to both Indigenous and non-Indigenous audiences, and their political campaign deploys an astoundingly diverse range of tactics and strategies. While the Living Forest proposal seeks first and foremost to safeguard the Sarayaku territory and surrounding rainforest, the ultimate objective of Sarayaku's praxis is to confront the Eurocentric model of human-nature relations that is responsible for the climate crisis and thus avert worldwide destruction. Their pedagogical intervention seeks to reawaken what many leaders claim is a universal philosophy that is patrimony of all humans. In almost all my interviews, Sarayaku leaders and activists discuss the process of publicly promoting the Living Forest proposal to outside audiences. They described organizing press conferences and workshops, presenting documents and plans, giving lectures and interviews, showing films and posting on social media, traveling as delegates to conferences and summits, submitting complaints and petitions, hosting fundraisers and festivals, participating in committees and commissions, co-authoring papers and manifestos, guest teaching at universities and institutions, playing music at live concerts, and gaining audience with state representatives, presidents, and even world religious figures like the Dalai Lama and the Pope. When promoting their cause to non-Indigenous audiences, Sarayaku activists and intellectuals often accentuates what seems to be ontological alterity by defending the existence of other than human sentient forest beings as a key to healthy ecosystems. While people in Sarayaku can engage this web of life through dreaming, fasting, trekking, myth-telling, etc., the challenge for their political praxis is to translate this reality in order to make it recognizable to outsiders. Interviewing leaders in Sarayaku, it became clear that there are both pessimistic and optimistic attitudes about these challenges to translating the Living Forest proposal. According to Hilda Santi, a former president of Sarayaku, quote, "We've brought the knowledge of Kausaksacha to schools and universities and to organizations. Still, many do not understand. Few will understand. They have to go little by little, analyzing and understanding." End quote. When I interviewed the leader, Patricia Gwalinga, in 2023, she told me, quote, "Since this was a concept that came from the shamans, the great challenge was writing it all down systematically. How do we explain to the world such a fundamental concept about nature and life? And we talked and we conversed, and in the end, we decided to put it down in writing to try to make it understandable, to put it in understandable terms." Thus, the challenge at the heart of Sarayaku's praxis is how to facilitate an intercultural conceptualization of what the living forest is and does. While Sariaku uses many forms of interculturality, such as the rights of nature, sustainability, good living, etc., the most recent iteration is promoting Kalsaksatra through the lens of Western science. Sariaku has recently been collaborating with climate scientists, wetland ecologists, mycologists, and plant biologists in order to reframe and bolster their ancestral model of nature using more mainstream perspectives. On this point, Patricia Gualinga told me, quote, "I don't think it will be revealed easily, but I believe we must keep trying. There are very perceptive people. We've met very perceptive scientists that have listened to us respectfully and have told us that they think we are right," end quote. This optimism came to fruition in 2023 when the Rights of Wetlands section of the Society for Wetland Scientists collaborated with Sariaku to develop a joint statement titled, quote, "Transforming Perspectives on Living Beings, a Convergence of Kalsaksatra and Contemporary Science," end quote, which was released at a side event at the 2023 United Nations Climate Week in New York City. In it, the authors state that, quote, "Scientific research leads us to conclude that the plant world, like the animal world, has forms of agency. These findings parallel the ancestral knowledge developed over millennia by Indigenous peoples." And they continue, quote, "The validity of Kalsaksatra is supported by scientific thinking and by evidence gathered from recent scientific research," end quote. Bolstered by this intercultural legitimization, Sariaku began to reach out to more scientists and initiate plans for a 2-week gathering, which would bring researchers to the heart of the living forest itself, where they could see, hear, touch, and feel what Sariaku knew so well. Thus, in September 2024, 45 scientists and academics came to Sariaku for a 2-week intercultural knowledge exchange. The meeting took place under the aegis of the 3rd annual More Than Human Life, or MOTH, gathering, hosted by Sariaku in conjunction with the New York University MOTH Project. A press release written in Spanish and posted on Sariaku's Facebook page provides greater details, and I translate. Quote, "The scientists, who will spend 2 weeks in the Sariaku territory, will search for and investigate, in collaboration with the Sariaku Forest Monitoring and Security Team, the fungi that live there, both the visible ones and the invisible ones that form a great network of life underground. The information collected based on Western scientific research processes will undoubtedly reinforce the concept, philosophy, and knowledge of Sariaku that the forest is alive and that everything is interconnected. This meeting, which combines the scientific, traditional, and spiritual knowledge of the Sariaku Indigenous people with the new technology and sciences of the Western world, aims to unite forces and transmit the message to the world that it is essential to work in constant respect and collaboration, that no discipline alone is sufficient, and that together we will be able to combat climate change. The primary objective of this event is to strengthen, reaffirm, and legitimize the proposal of the Kalsaksatra Declaration," end quote. On the first day of the meeting, the president of Sariaku, Hernan Maliber, gave a welcome address to the visitors in which he stated, quote, "We have strengthened the Kalsaksatra initiative with philosophical, anthropological, and legal research so that the proposal can dialogue with conventional science," end quote. This invitation to the researchers to conversely dialogue with the principles and processes of the living forest set the stage for 2 weeks of both physical and intellectual exploration designed to share knowledge across disciplines and cultures. Over the course of the 2 weeks, the visitors were guided through workshops, demonstrations, and activities in order to learn about both the rainforest and everyday life in Sariaku. Some of the scientists spent the majority of their time with the Kaski Runas, Sariaku's forest ranger team, trekking to remote parts of the territory to gather samples. The wetland scientists explored Moretté palm swamps, while the mycologists cored underground soils. Merlin Sheldrake, a well-known mycologist who participated in the meeting, emphasized in an Instagram post the importance of data collection. Quote, I was there sampling soils to document underground mycorrhizal fungal communities with a wonderful team. At the request of the Sariaku leaders of our team, we sampled in rotational agricultural sites and on sacred mountaintops, which have unusual ecological characteristics and unique floral diversity. It's too early to say what we found, but we're all impatiently waiting for the data to come back and to start working on the data sets with our Sariaku colleagues. End quote. While mycological research was a central focus, intercultural dialogue touched on many biological and ecological aspects of the forest. According to the Facebook post published by Sariaku during the event, quote, "In our conversation on day 3, we explored how plants express themselves from two perspectives, ancestral knowledge and science. Traditional cultures view plants as living beings with whom they have a deep connection, reflected in practices and myths. On the other hand, science shows that plants communicate through chemical signals and responses to their environment. Integrating both perspectives allows us to better understand our relationship with nature, highlighting the importance of a holistic approach." End quote. Putting such an intercultural and holistic approach into practice was meant to deepen scientific understanding of the natural world and broaden mainstream understanding of the living forest. In order to publicly share the details of the 2-week knowledge exchange in Sariaku, the day after the scientists returned to the US, a panel discussion was held at New York University during the 2024 United Nations Climate Week in New York City. The panel brought together Sariaku leaders and their academic collaborators to share the findings of their ongoing partnership. When asked about the purpose of the collaborative meeting, Jose Walinga, a former president of Sariaku, said, quote, "A convergence is very important, to enter into a dialogue not only to exist in resistance, but to confront each other, between peoples, between brothers, between societies, and between cultures. Even though we have different models of life and education, we are one human race, and therefore we have to understand each other. We have to reach a dialogue. We have to reach an agreement. We have to come together to be able to confront the phenomena that we are currently experiencing." Through publicly disclosing Indigenous ancestral knowledge to scientific interpretation, the representatives of the living forest ask us to listen and learn from them in turn. Sariaku thus enacts a praxis which aims to reconnect all humans with the natural world. The Living Forest proposal doesn't merely denounce environmental degradation or capitalist commodification of nature. It presents itself as a viable solution for confronting climate change and enacting a sustainable future for the whole planet. The significance of interculturality for Sariaku's praxis was well summed up by the current president, Hernan Malaver, in a live press conference before the international meeting. And I'll conclude with his words, quote, "It is important to emphasize that in the history of science, ancestral knowledge has been ignored until now. However, today there is a convergence or an epistemological duality in understanding these two concepts that are vital for the existence of humanity. That is, empirical knowledge, or the knowledge of ancestral science, and Western knowledge are important for a view of nature as a living being and a subject of law. Therefore, the people of Sariaku call on the scientific and academic community to take a deep look, to make a profound change, and to see nature as a living entity." End quote. Thank you very much.